Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, really whatever gets our attention. My name is Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. Joined, as always, on this chilly December morning by Scott Barker, also co-founder and co-publisher of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
Doing okay. We're barreling toward Christmas. I am just now getting prepared for Christmas 2017. So we can imagine the preparations for 2024.
I've still got some Christmas shopping to do myself. Do you do Christmas shopping in person? Do you go to stores and look at things, or do you just scroll the internet and point and click from the comfort of your couch?
I hate shopping, but I prefer shopping in person.
Mm-hmm.
But especially, it's kind of funny in when I was younger and didn't have lots of people to buy for, I would always wait till Christmas Eve to do my Christmas shopping. Two things. I think one was, it's Christmas Eve and everybody's, used to be in a good mood. I think it's gotten a little more stressful nowadays, but then there was also the pressure of making, I've got to get it. I think that's kind of the journalist in me coming out. You got to have a deadline,
right?
And I'll go right up against that deadline, and so prefer in person. Although I have succumbed to the allure of shopping online a little bit. The
convenience.
Yeah, yes.
I have to say, when my kids give me gift lists, wish lists these days, it's literally just a list of links. They're like, here, go to this link, order this thing. It's very specific. But yeah, I do still, I like getting out and about, seeing the crowds, seeing the lights. I've always been sort of a sucker for all that stuff. And of course, there's a lot of good holiday stuff going on over the next week or so. So certainly encourage anybody who hasn't been downtown, say, to see the lights, or out to Concord Park to see the lights, or out to Farragut Admiral Park to see the lights. There's a lot of places around Knox County you can go for Christmas spirit. Chilhowie Park, to mention another one. Lots of things to do and see this time of year.
Actually, was sitting on my porch the other night, my front porch, and Christmas drove past. It was a pickup truck covered. I mean, every inch of the body was covered in Christmas lights.
Wow, that's impressive.
It was pretty amazing. It was I mean, more than a Christmas float.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing, and they just kind of drove past and went on.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Spreading a little Christmas cheer in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I guess so. I've only seen it once, but it was quite a treat.
Well, ho ho ho. All right, we do have a few things to talk about this week. The Arts and Culture Alliance of Knoxville has some plans to build out something new in their space in the Emporium building. Speaking of buildings, the Sanitary Laundry, long troubled blighted property on North Broadway near the intersection with North Central Street, has a new owner and new plans, and that all came through City Council this week, so we'll talk about that. We will take just a couple minutes to pay tribute to Nikki Giovanni, Knoxville native who died this week, and she was acclaimed, tributes paid to her from all over the country, all over the world, really. She was a universally known and widely admired figure. But speaking of literature, to start us off, I wanted to return to the topic of banned books. We touched on this on last week's podcast, mentioned that Knox County Schools has now removed, or is in the process of removing, 48 books from school libraries across the district. These are at elementary, middle, and high school level, although the preponderance of them, 33 of them, are at the high school level. And so we talked last week a little bit about just kind of what was on that list and the state law that led to it. This week, I wrote a sort of more in-depth look at the process behind this. How did the school system arrive at these particular 48 books? And what is the plan going forward for compliance with this law? And just as a reminder, the law is the Age-Appropriate Materials Act, which was passed by the legislature in 2022 and then amended this year. And in the amendment this year, they added much more specific restrictions on what kinds of materials are the state legislature considers age-appropriate for grades K through 12. So we're only talking about school libraries here. We're not, at the moment, talking about public libraries, although I think it is entirely possible, if not likely, that we will be having discussions about public libraries sometime in the near future, because certainly some of the people, including our local chapter of Moms for Liberty that have been active in trying to get books removed from school libraries, have also made noises and spoken to county commission about concerns about books in the public libraries. But for now, we're just talking about school libraries. And what the legislature did was say that any work that describes or depicts nudity, sexual conduct, sexual excitement, sadomasochistic abuse, a very specific category to put in there, or excess violence, that those are not appropriate for any age level, like regardless. And they didn't, now you could say that it is a more specific list than what was in the law before, because the law before basically talked more broadly about materials that might be considered objectionable and might appeal to prurient interests and so forth. But the prior regulation still maintained the kind of standard definition of obscenity, which comes from a Supreme Court case almost 50 years ago. And for something to be considered legally obscene in this country, it has to be found in violation of community standards and appeal to the prurient interest, but also it must be lacking any literary, artistic, social, educational merit. And so lots of things that people might have specific concerns about, including many of these books that have now been removed from Knox County Schools, would never have been removed under that ruling, because almost all of these books, have some kind of literary merit. I mean, they're literature. They're books that are on the shelves of a library, that counter to some of the more hyperbolic and hysterical things that you hear. There is no pornography in school libraries. You'll hear people saying this, there's pornography in school libraries. That's not true. I mean, it's just basically false. If you hear anybody say that, you know that they either don't know what they're talking about or they are deliberately lying, because there is not pornography in school libraries. Pornography is a separate, specifically defined, that is the category of things that do not have any literary merit. We all know what pornography is, right? It's showing people, it's showing some kind of sexual content with the explicit intention of creating sexual excitement, and they're not like telling you a story, or, well, I guess maybe sometimes they are, not a compelling narrative, let's say. But then there's this whole other category of art and literature that, because art and literature reflects the totality of human experience absolutely includes sexuality. It's how we all got here. And so there is also art and literature that includes sexual content. And so that's more of what we're talking about here. So I sat down with Keith Wilson, who's the assistant superintendent for academics, to kind of talk about how did they approach this? Because every school system in the state was just handed this set of guidelines and told, you must be in compliance. If they're not in compliance, they are at risk. Like, they can be sued by parents. There are incentives for them to be in compliance, obviously, with state law. So he said that they had a series of trainings with their school librarians. They walked them through the guidelines and talked about how to very specifically apply these guidelines, and that you can no longer look at, like, oh yeah, there's this one picture here that shows nudity, but this book is great, it's a classic, it has all these other values. You're not allowed to consider any of those other factors, like the reasons why the book is probably there in the first place, because none of these books are on the shelves because some librarian was like, oh good, we can put more nudity on the shelves. That's not why they're picking these books. But you're not allowed to consider whatever the actual reason or educational value of the book is. It's just, does any part of it, one picture, one paragraph, theoretically one sentence in a 1,000-page book, could be enough to get it banned under these restrictions. Now, Knox County school libraries have about 800,000 volumes in them across the county. That doesn't mean 800,000 titles, because there's a lot of titles that are in multiple schools. There's probably some titles like Dr. Seuss books or whatever that are in most of the schools. But 800,000 volumes, and individual school librarians were basically tasked with, and this is what they've spent the last several months doing, going through their collections and looking for things. And of course, they have some sense of what kinds of things they're looking for, including titles that, get challenged a lot, or there's a lot of lists out there floating around, including from Moms for Liberty, of ostensibly objectionable titles. Wilson said that one thing they did not do, they didn't give their librarians those lists. They didn't give them the list from Moms for Liberty. They didn't give them the list from Wilson County Schools, which has removed 390 books, and that list has kind of made the rounds of the whole state. He said they did not do that and just say, okay, go down this list and remove anything on it. They instructed the librarians to use their own judgment and knowledge of their collections to go through and evaluate them. So those librarians identified 121 titles that potentially had issues, sent those to a district-level evaluation committee, which was made up of Wilson, Sarah Searles, who's the director of academic resources and oversees school libraries, and Aaron Phillips, who's the district's executive director of reading. And they reviewed the lists that were provided by the librarians. And they, so there were 121 titles submitted to them. 69 of them they looked at and they said, we don't think this crosses the line, and they sent it back to the shelves. There are 4 of them, I think, that they were still looking at for further review, and then the 48 that they identified. And the result of all of this, Scott, is a list that, to me, is just kind of incoherent in the sense that, like, if you are looking for, like, one of the concerns was, because what's happened in some other districts and other parts of the country has been books that tend to get banned are books with, like, LGBTQ content or books that talk about racial issues and so forth. Looking at this list of 48, it's hard to see. It's not like, they went after this particular kind of book. I mean, there are some instances here where, like, there's a 7-novel series, like by Sarah Maas, who's a popular young adult fantasy author. It's like, she's got a 7-book series. 2 of the 7 books were banned. So not even like all the books in any given series are banned. So it's not like they were looking for, we're going to get out this kind of book. It looks to me like they were really kind of sticking to the assignment and saying, just like, is there one particular thing in this one particular book that actually crosses these lines?
Yeah, for instance, the Moss books. I mean, it's a series, and I'm not familiar with them.
I have not read them. I just know they're very popular.
But because no one would call me a young adult. But many multiple volume series can be considered one work.
Absolutely.
So it's one work and 2 title. Did you say 2 or 3?
2.
Two titles taken out of that work. I mean, it just kind of goes to show that it's not, the work overall isn't, objectionable, apparently.
And it shows that it doesn't look like the librarians were applying like any ideological framework to this.
And it almost demonstrates kind of the one of the things that kind of makes you scratch your head about this whole policy is that it's, or the law is that, I mean, these removals were checking boxes literally,
mm-hmm.
and without, and they said, okay, you don't want us to consider the context, we won't.
Yep.
And so they didn't, and it's and it's strange. One of the things is I was a little surprised. Well, not really surprised, but if they truly wanted to ban books that contained excessive violence, there would be hundreds on there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, the excessive violence part is it's almost a catch-all because there are so many that could be on there. Almost any book about any war,
yeah,
regardless of, I mean, it doesn't have to be an anti-war book like All Quiet on the Western Front, which is an absolutely phenomenal book that a lot of high schoolers can certainly handle. But any the red badge of courage,
right.
Right.
Warfare by itself is essentially an extended exercise in excessive violence.
Oh yeah, I mean that's what warfare is. Warfare is excessive violence, and whether you think it's justified or not, that's what it is. And so, I mean, it's one of the things that one of the slippery slopes you get on when you start banning books.
Well, and it looks like, and I had specific questions about the excess violence category, precisely for the reasons you're saying, is that it seems especially broad of the ones on the list. And it's also not one that you hear, when you hear people objecting to books, it is, much, much, much more often because of sexual content than because of violence or, frankly, anything else. It's almost always because of nudity or sex. Those are the things that get people worked up. And the books that got removed because of excess violence, I think there were 7 or 8 of them on this list, were mostly graphic novels, so, book-length comic books, essentially, that, and I got curious because there's a series called Lock and Key, and again, this is a series with multiple titles in it. 2 of those titles got pulled under this. So I went and got one of those out of the Knox County Public Library, which does still have these books.
Shocked.
And there are a couple of scenes of fights in it. It's set in the, I think, 1700s. And so people are fighting with, swords and daggers and whatever. And there were a couple of pretty gruesome scenes. Like there was a, scene with a decapitated body and blood flowing out of the neck. It looks to me like visual representation was kind of the easiest thing for them to look for in applying these categories, because when you get into descriptions, it can get a little hazier about how explicit it really is. When something is drawn and you can look at it and say, yes, that's what that is, it's easier to call it excessive or explicit. And that's why there are some books, like you're saying, that have very violent content in them that were not removed. On the other hand, we had some children's picture books, In the Night Kitchen by Maurice Sendak, Draw Me a Star by Eric Carle, who's the author of The Very Hungry Caterpillar, that have very brief, there's like specific image, like these are picture books, so they have a lot of pictures in them. In both of those books, I think in The Night Kitchen, there are a couple pictures of a naked little boy, and in Draw Me a Star, there's one image of a naked man and woman, but it's done in this almost kind of collage-y visual style. Again, think about the Hungry Caterpillar. Like, you can kind of barely tell that these people are naked. My guess is that what triggered it was that the guy in his groin, there's like a teeny little kind of pink triangle sticking down. So you're like, okay, well, that's his penis, and so that counts as nudity.
If I recall again, I was reading my kid 30 years ago. In the night kitchen, isn't it just a one pen stroke?
Yeah, it's like a little curved pen stroke.
It doesn't look like a penis.
No, it's a naked little boy floating in a bottle of a giant bottle of milk, and like where his penis would be, there's like a little, right? It's like a little semicircle or whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a penis.
It is certainly not. It is not what you would call an explicit anatomic drawing.
Yes, it is not a
cartoonish little drawing of a naked little boy. There's another book, a very sweet book called "There's a Baby Coming," which is a book written for kids whose parents are expecting another child. And the whole book is this, maybe 4 or 5 year old boy, like it's written for young kids, kind of thinking about what it's going to be like when the baby gets here. What will the baby be like? And he imagines all these different scenarios of what the baby might do or whatever. There is one image, and the whole book is kind of him having this conversation with his very pregnant mother about the baby. And there is one scene as they're continuing their conversation where the kid is just like getting out of the bath and his mom is toweling him off. And same deal. Like, yes, he's naked. Like, it's a drawing of it. It's a children's book illustrated version of a naked little boy in a bathtub. And, you just see these things and you think, how is this age inappropriate? It's almost like the legislature has forgotten that all people, including people under the age of 18, have bodies themselves. Like, people wake up every morning and look in the mirror and see nudity, right? It's just like how we are. It's literally how we arrive naked into the world, created by whatever entity you choose to believe in or not. But that's just, it is kind of puzzling, the notion that there's something, I really want to have a conversation with somebody to explain what is inappropriate about showing the human body to humans who have bodies. But anyway.
There are people who will take you up on that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. I understand, like, showing, like, explicit sexuality or whatever. Like, I get it. Nobody's putting, Penthouse or whatever qualifies as porno. I don't even know if Penthouse still exists, but nobody's putting it in the school library if it does.
No, all the kids are accessing it through their phone.
Well, right. And so that is the other sort of like absurdity of this entire conversation that we're having nationwide about banning books in the 2020s. Because like we all have phones. Many people under the age of 18 have phones. And yes, parents do set their own rules for those. I certainly have with my kids. But to pretend or imagine, or honestly, to hope that children are so focused on the contents of their school libraries that that's where they're going to get primary access to anything, any kind of information, including information about sexuality. Like it's fundamentally ridiculous, and is enough to make you wonder, like, what's the real point of this? Yeah. Like, what is the real point of a law that leads to Maurice Sendak books getting removed from school libraries, or Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, which got removed from high school libraries because there's some descriptions of nudity in it? And, if you've read Slaughterhouse-Five, the descriptions of nudity, which I didn't even remember, I had to go back and look them up, that is not what sticks with you out of that book.
No.
Nor is that the point of that book. That book is primarily about Vonnegut's experiences in World War II, witnessing the firebombing of Dresden and surviving it and the horrors of it. That is a book about the horrors of war, but it wasn't even banned for excess violence. I mean, firebombing Dresden, again, whether you think it was justified or not, was certainly
pretty excessive.
It was deliberately excessive. But that's not why the book got banned. It got banned because there's some descriptions of nudity. So, among the peculiarities of this law is that it is being enforced on a district by district basis. And so we're getting these widely divergent results where Wilson County is banning 390 books. Knox County is banning 48. Some other districts, including districts around us, have banned much smaller numbers than that. And Metro Nashville, which is the second largest district in the whole state, so far at least, has just come out and said, we've looked at the law, and at the moment, we don't, we're having our librarians review it, but at the moment, we don't see the need to change anything we're doing. So that's the range that we're getting. Yeah. And this seems like another one of these things that is eventually there's either going to be lawsuits over this, or the state's going to come back with more specific, maybe even more draconian regulations. The other thing that can happen is if a parent, say in Knox County, looks at this list of 48 titles and says, well, there's worse books than that, because, like, for example, our local chapter of Moms for Liberty, they identified 55 books that they say have explicit content, or 51, in Knox County schools. Only 8 of those books are on this list of the 48. So the majority of the books that our local Moms for Liberty chapter flagged are still on bookshelves. I'm sure they're not happy about that. So what can happen now under the new law is a parent can file a challenge, which they've always been able to do, but the law put in a stricter time frame. The school system only has 60 days to respond. And then if they either don't respond, or if the parent is dissatisfied with the decision of the school district, they can appeal it to the State Textbook Commission. The unknown at the moment, because this hasn't happened yet, is if let's say an appeal comes from Knox County, goes to the State Textbook Commission, the Textbook Commission says, yes, this title is offensive and it should be removed. Will that decision only apply to the county that the appeal comes from? Or is that how we're going to start to develop a list of books that are banned across the state? That is unknown. Probably we're going to find out in the coming year, because I bet there are people in Knox County and other places preparing to file challenges. People were waiting to see what would actually get removed. Now that we have the list, I will not be surprised. I will be surprised if we don't see challenges here and other places. And we'll see how this all plays out. But that's what's going on with the book banning in Knox County. I do think one thing that's worth mentioning is that even though these decisions were made ultimately by school librarians, they were the ones tasked with it. I know many librarians, both school librarians and public librarians, University of Tennessee librarians. I know a lot of librarians. They're good people to know. They're fun to hang out with. This is not what any of them got into this job to do. And I honestly think even like our local district as a whole has not up until now shown any great appetite for banning books. They've kind of had their challenge process in place for a long time and been comfortable. As recently as a year ago, Superintendent John Ryswick was saying, I think the process we have in place, is good and we can rely on that. So if people are concerned or frustrated about any of this, I think it is that those feelings are probably better directed toward your state legislators than your local school officials, who I think are mostly, now there are some members of the school board for sure who are more enthusiastic about this and others who are not so enthusiastic. But overall, this is just not, even though this list of 48 titles was come up with by our local librarians, this is all being driven by the state law. Okay. Let's stick with literature for a minute and talk about Nikki Giovanni. And Scott, I'm curious, because you grew up in East Tennessee, what, if anything, was your sense of Nikki Giovanni growing up here? When did you become aware of Nikki Giovanni?
I didn't become aware of Nikki Giovanni till college. Mm-hmm. Of course, I didn't grow up in Knoxville. I grew up in Kingston, a small town. We didn't. I also wasn't aware of until high school, late high school. Wasn't aware of James Agee. Wasn't aware of Cormac McCarthy until I was in college. I mean, there were,
speaking of excess violence.
Speaking of really, so I mean, that wasn't unusual that I wasn't aware of her, but I did become aware of her when I was in college, and really even then was. Kind of, I don't want to say underappreciated because I loved her poetry, but her and I was an English major, so that was, possibly if I'd been a biology major, I never would have heard of Nikki Giovanni until whatever. But while I admired her poetry, I don't think I appreciated her stature in the community. I thought that because I've lived almost all of my adulthood in Knoxville, and was kind of thinking, well, maybe the folks in Knoxville just, kind of inflate her importance to make themselves feel better. that was a startlingly bad assessment on my part, because she was just absolutely, and she's so much more than just a poet. I mean, she's also a major voice in civil rights community, and I had the good fortune to meet her a couple of years ago when she was in town for the dedication of the plaque for her home place in what used to be I believe that was Mountain View is on
what was Mulvaney Street.
Mulvaney Street, which was Mulvaney Street, is no longer Mulvaney Street, is now Hall of Fame Drive. So and she was, and she's one of these people, and granted, I don't know her well. I basically met her once. She was on the one hand delightful, but on the other hand, you knew that she had a backbone of steel.
Yeah.
That she had this strength to her that was very evident. Even though she was delightful to talk with, you knew that she was no one to mess with.
and I saw her at that dedication event as well, and she's this tiny little woman. She was in her 70s at the time. She died at 81 this past week, and just this very small, beaming smile, but absolutely, as you say, even without knowing her work, I think you could get this sort of like radiating sense of strength.
Oh yeah,
from her.
Oh, absolutely. That was completely separate from her work. Although I shouldn't say that, because her work is an outgrowth of her. But if you didn't know anything about her work, you would get that aura from her.
Yeah.
That you would get it.
Absolutely.
And she was, and she had that a magnetic personality. She was no wallflower poet.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, so she was born in Knoxville, and actually grew up a lot of her childhood in Cincinnati, but maintained close family ties here. Her grandparents were here, and she frequently came down during the summers. One of her best-known poems, and one of the best-known pieces of literature about Knoxville that anybody has written, is a poem called Knoxville, Tennessee, which is a short and just delightful sort of sensory-filled poem about childhood summers in Knoxville, and kind of all of the smells and sounds and tastes of the fresh blackberries and so forth that she remembers. She actually graduated from the old Austin High School. She moved back here the last few years of her high school years and lived with her grandparents, and so she's not just a native of Knoxville, but also actually a graduate of what was then our segregated black high school. And she went to Fisk University in Nashville for her college work, and then became well known as part of what was called the Black Arts Movement, which really emerged sort of in the late 1960s, kind of coming out of the Civil Rights era into the kind of Black Power era that was also the era of the Black Panthers and so forth. And she was, I think one thing that struck me going back and not just reading about her in that era, but you can find videos on YouTube, she was a really well-known media presence. She was often on TV because she was very good in those. I mean, she was a terrific writer, but she was also very good as just, she had, like you say, a lot of charisma, and people loved to have her on. She would be she was the young radical black woman voice, when somebody was looking for that voice on a TV panel or something. And a terrific video that actually we linked in our Friday newsletter, but that you can find on YouTube. There was a TV show called Soul, SOUL, ! In the early 70s. I don't remember which station it was based out of, but it was basically a black arts and culture and events show where they would have people on to talk about various issues. And they had a two-part, so it's actually like a 2-hour video you can watch. It's a conversation in 1971, I think, between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin. Also, obviously, great Black literary voice. And it's a fascinating discussion, and and it's a very real, it's a very candid talk about their views on, all sorts of racial issues, political issues, issues of art, and highly worth your time. So I would look for that. But yeah, I think in recent years, she'd become kind of easy to take for granted in a certain way in Knoxville because she came back to town a lot. There were lots of opportunities to see her read and speak. She made an appearance at the Big Ears Festival not too many years ago. And so a lot of people in town certainly knew her. And I think that even though, she never lived in Knoxville again after leaving for college, she really did, unlike, say, Cormac McCarthy, who we talk about as a Knoxville writer, but when he was gone, he was gone.
Yeah.
He stopped writing about East Tennessee when he moved out west, and he stopped coming back here except for very occasional visits to family. She always embraced Knoxville and proudly called herself Appalachian.
Right. Yeah. That was one of the things that struck me about her.
Yeah.
Was that she embraced all of Appalachia, and it's very easy to buy into the Appalachian stereotypes, and one of those is it's a bunch of poor white people, but no, it's much more diverse than that, and she proudly embraced her Appalachian heritage.
Yeah, and she was kind of a pioneer in what's become known as the Afro-Latin movement, which is it's asserting the place of African Americans in Appalachia, because as long as we have had Appalachia in the United States, there have been African Americans here. And I think that was important to her. That's become a more common thing to talk about these days, including, of course, we've had the excellent Black in Appalachia podcast here in recent years. But she was talking about that, I think probably before almost anybody else, and really asserting that. So yeah, it was just interesting to see the outpouring. I mean, there were obituaries and tributes to her from really around the world. She was a person of tremendous kind of cultural and literary stature. And she was from right here, and she wrote a lot about Knoxville. There was that poem I talked about. Not everything she wrote was so positive. She has a great essay, which is a little bit hard to find. I've looked for it to find like a copy of it online and can't find it, but you can find it in some of her collected works, called 400 Mulvaney Street, which was the address of her grandparents' house on Mulvaney Street. And it's a whole essay about urban renewal and what happened and the displacement, and kind of the great sadness for her, for her grandmother who was forced out of her home, and the kind of civic violence in a way that was done to that whole area of East Knoxville, with all of those close-knit communities and Black-owned businesses and so forth. And that it's one of the great chronicles of Knoxville history, told in this very personal way, and definitely worth reading if you haven't. One thing I wanted to mention is that plaque you're talking about, which is outside the Cal Johnson Recreation Center on Hall of Fame Drive, close to where her grandparents lived. Part of the reason that the plaque was put there is that the playground there, the Cal Johnson playground, was actually already there when she was a kid. She remembers going across, and she remembered going across and playing in that playground. It was one of the few things, maybe the only thing
left from that area, and that's one thing. I mean, I talked about. I came to Knoxville as an adult, essentially, and did not know the history of how the Civic Coliseum and Civic Auditorium came to be where they were, and the apartments there that those were those were really cool apartments right near downtown. Well, no, that was the African American neighborhood at one point. It was completely scrubbed away and torn out of the fabric of Knoxville and tossed aside, and it was and it was people like Nikki Giovanni who kind of, impressed upon, me as a white male, the tragedy that urban renewal represented for the African American community.
Absolutely. And I also think it's worth just mentioning that Nikki Giovanni was also gay. She was married to a woman, survived by her wife. And I think it's interesting if you think about her and you think about Buford Delaney, another great black artist from Knoxville who we've talked about before, who was also friends with James Baldwin. So we have two Knoxville sort of icons who were both in the circle with James Baldwin, who's sort of one of the great black writers of the 20th century. Buford Delaney was also gay. And, we talk about issues of diversity here and Knoxville's and Knox County's struggles sometimes to sufficiently acknowledge and appreciate the diversity of experiences that make up life here in Knoxville and Knox County. But, gay people in Knoxville are not a new phenomenon.
No.
People from marginalized groups and communities right here in our own city and our own county have been some of our greatest artists, some of the greatest voices that have come from here, and that have written things that tell us about ourselves. And I just think that's always worth keeping in mind. Okay. Enough about literature, I guess. This isn't just book talk. We also talk about
book chat with the Compass Boys.
That's right. We also talk about buildings. That's what we're doing this week, books and buildings. Sanitary Laundry Building on North Broadway. And we've had written about this before, the plans for it, but it actually came through City Council for approval this week. So, Scott, what is happening there?
Well, it's a done deal now. McCarty, Holsapple McCarty, the venerable architecture firm here, they've been around for about 60 years, they've acquired the building and will be renovating it for their new headquarters, thanks in part to a payment in lieu of tax agreement that the city council approved last week, that freezes their property taxes for 10 years after the construction is over with, so that it makes it easier for them to make their debt service payments and such, as they move forward. So it's a tax incentive for them. One of the interesting things about the tax freeze is it's been vacant. The property's been vacant for 30 years. The city has owned it for longer, or for about a decade, because they took it through a tax foreclosure. So there are no property taxes on the property, and the payment that McCarty Holsapple is going to have to make in lieu of paying property taxes is zero.
Right.
So that's kind of an unusual thing. There were several things that were kind of unusual about this. One is it is going to be an owner-occupied building. I mean, most payment in lieu of tax or pilot incentives go to developers who will renovate renovate a dilapidated building or one in need of work, and either just lease out units from it, whether they're residential units or commercial units, or they will sell the building to someone else. And but they don't occupy it themselves. We're dependent on that revenue that they'll be getting from other sources. This is McCarty Holsapple. It's going to be their headquarters. It's going to be an owner-occupied pilot, which is very rare. And there are going to be some commercial spaces in there as well. A couple of small commercial spaces, maybe a cafe, that sort of thing. But it's primarily going to be their headquarters. They've released some renderings, pretty neat. If you've been by there, it's real close to Old Gray Cemetery and Emory Place, near the you can even an old guy with a bad shoulder like me can throw a rock from the front door to the corner of Broadway and Central, and it's been an eyesore for years, been contaminated for years, and
right. It's that laundry part of the
yes. Everybody thinks of laundry as being a clean thing, but in order to clean sheets and shirts and suits and dresses.
Yeah, especially the dry cleaning.
The dry cleaning part is very, very nasty. In fact, the city through KCDC has got a state grant to do some remediation, and remediation is going to be part of their package here. McCarty-Hull-Sapple is going to be investing $8.2 million or the project is going to be $8.2 million, but they're going to get, and this is kind of common for these projects in that the financing is very complex. Just the upfront costs, they're getting tax credits, $1.5 million in tax credits for both solar, because it's going to be a sustainable building, and historic tax credits. They're getting a $500,000 grant from the state to do more remediation. They have to do more cleanup of the solvents and the lock. They're going to have to do more work to get that. You get a historic preservation grant from the city. They're putting a couple $1 million of their own cash into it and borrowing $4.5 million or close to $4.5 million for the project. So it's a very complex financing deal, and like I said, the pilot will help them on the back end, as that $4.3 million loan will be easier for them to pay off with the lower annual overhead because they're not going to be paying the property taxes on it. In fact, Ben Bentley, the CEO of KCDC, told city council members that if they didn't have the pilot, they wouldn't be able to make the debt service. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that is really it was a very vital part of getting this, turning this long-standing, environmentally challenged eyesore into a nice looking. The renderings are pretty sharp. They're
an architecture firm. They can do nice renderings.
They can do that, yeah, and to clean up, cleaning up the site as well. Removing it as a hazard, and so Nathan Honeycutt, who's one of the principals at McCarty-Hull-Sapple, talked about that. He also talked about how that this is, they could have gone anywhere. I mean, they are an architectural firm.
Yeah, they
could go and find a greenfield somewhere and design and build their own headquarters.
Yep.
And they could have done that very easily without any kind of grants from the state and having to do the environmental cleanup and all that stuff. And they could have done that, but Honeycutt has talked about how they are part of the community and wanted to do something that was beneficial to the community as well, and create a beautiful space. And they've done a lot of historic preservation work. I mean, that's not new territory for them. So in fact, they're doing the expansion of the Tennessee Theater downtown that we've written about and talked about. There wasn't any real pushback from council members on this. Sometimes there will be at least some pushback on it, but there wasn't really any here because quite frankly, it is a building that has been off the tax rolls for 30 years. What's another 10 years? Right. And, I mean that's kind of flippant, but I mean it is true, and
right.
because
it's not contributing anything right now,
right?
It's just a liability.
And once it comes back on the tax rolls, 10 years after the construction is complete, the current projection, and this will probably be higher in reality, the current projection is it will generate about $125,000 a year in property taxes, and that's split between the city and the county, a little bit heavier on the city end. But that's $125,000 a year that they will be paying at least in perpetuity. They'll be, and it'll go up as property tax rates go up and the value of the property goes up, and all that. So there was not a whole lot of vocal opposition anyway. In fact, several council members, Charles Thomas, Lauren Ryder, Gwen McKenzie, they all spoke glowingly about the firm and about the project. And it's funny because the way that the council district borders are drawn, the building is inside the 6th district, which Gwen McKenzie represents. By that stone's throw I mentioned, it was the border between her district and the 4th district, which Lauren Ryder represents, is right there. And in fact, Ryder can actually walk to the Sanitary Laundry Building from her house.
Right, much more easily than McKenzie can.
Much more easily than McKenzie can, and but they, there was all pretty positive response from council members. It was approved unanimously, and McCarty, Holsapple said, Nathan Honeycutt said they're going to be closing at the end of the month, January. They're going to begin construction and hopes to have it finished by September of 2025.
Wow, quick turnaround.
Yeah, it is a quick turnaround, and now one aside, and then we can move on to other discussions of other buildings. But the property also includes the building behind the sanitary laundry, which was most recently known as Bar Marley,
somewhat
local,
notorious spot.
Yes, kind of a party space.
It was a bar that operated for, I don't know, maybe 2 years. I don't remember how long it managed to stay.
It was short-lived.
It was sort of in perpetual danger of being shut down the whole time it operated. There were a lot of I never did make it over there, not least because I was aware of its status as a potentially contaminated site, and didn't seem like a great place to hang out. But you can still see. I guess this means that finally the mannequin of the woman on a surfboard on the roof of the Bar Marley building is presumably going to come down at some point.
I did not ask Honeycutt if
they have plans
if they have plans to preserve said mannequin. I doubt it very seriously. They are going to keep the building. At one point, there was discussion of them
taking down the Bar Marley
building, but they're going to apparently leave it standing and be part of the renovations. But and I would imagine that that's something that could change. The main thing is the sanitary laundry building, because it is the historic building.
Sits right there.
It's a 99-year-old building. The sanitary laundry was in business from 1926 to 1993. Very prominent business in the community. Jack Neely of the Knoxville History Project wrote an interesting history of the establishment. It's kind of one of those murky areas that Jack always seems to find in Knoxville history. The head of sanitary laundry at one point may or may not have been, shared the same name, may or may not have been a prominent bootlegger as well. Don't really know.
So it might be contaminated with more than cleaning solvents.
Yes. Well, I had to lubricate the machines with something.
That's
so
right.
Anyway, but it is a historic building. It does have a rather striking exterior. It's boarded up at the moment, but McCarty Hill Sapple is going to turn it into an open and airy space. according to the renderings that they have, and we'll watch that as it happens over the next few months and be around to report on its opening in September or so.
And I do think it's worth just kind of putting this in the context of that whole area, because we're coming up on probably close to 20 years since the city created the quote-unquote what they called the Downtown North redevelopment area, which is really kind of the whole corridor coming up Central from Emory Place, that intersection of Central and Broadway, that whole kind of nexus there. And on the one hand, it has been sort of a long time coming. On the other hand, an awful lot has already happened there. And where the Sanitary Laundry Building is, like already right around the corner from it, you have Paisan Bakery and Remedy Coffee. Of course, Axle Logistics is now occupying 2 whole blocks of North Central going up there. You have the Yeehaw Brewing Company, their big complex. And then a little bit farther up, of course, you get into Happy Holler, including our producer Seth's Pirate Bar Empire up there. There is a lot of activity already in the area, and I think having this large building, restored to full use, including all the employees who are going to be there now every day, just kind of adds to that ongoing revitalization there.
Oh, absolutely. And then, of course, you got Emory Place there as well.
Yep.
And which is
a lot going on in Emory Place.
Emory Place is one of the neatest little corners of the urban portion of Knoxville. If you're listening and you've never been to Emory Place, it's not a big spot. It is a place. It's not huge, but it is it's a really interesting little enclave between Broadway and Central, and well worth a little visit to that. And then, of course, you can also then go up the street to Happy Holler to the Power Bar and enjoy a beverage there.
A lot happening right there in the kind of near North Knoxville commercial corridors. All right. Well, we did also write about another building, which is the Emporium Building, big historic building there on the corner of South Gay Street and Jackson Avenue. And the Arts and Culture Alliance has been based there now going back, I forget how long, probably nearly 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
But they have expansionist plans.
Yes. Well, the Emporium Building is, again, one of those historic buildings in downtown on 100 block of Gay Street. David Dewhurst renovated it. He was one of the first buildings downtown to be renovated in the renaissance that the urban core has seen over the past couple of decades. And of course, as it's a historic building downtown, you can't really build up, you can't really build out. It's right there on the Jackson Avenue ramp up to Gay Street is next to it. You can't go up, you can't go out. So they're going down. Mm-hmm. They're going to renovate the basement where the old furnace used to be for the entire building. But the Arts and Culture Alliance is going to spend $4 million to renovate that basement space into a performance art and an immersive art and performance venue. Have about 200 seats. One of those small venues that smaller companies can use for rehearsals, performances, that sort of thing. It's going to be called the Furnace as a nod toward the previous use of the space. But it's going to be, again, McCarty Wholesample is the firm that's designing the build out. As we talked about them having the expertise in historic preservation as well. But Lisa Zenny, who's the executive director of the Arts and Culture Alliance, she talked to our correspondent Matthew Everett, who wrote this story about kind of the need that a lot of the smaller theater groups, especially the kind of need they had for space. You think of the theater groups in Knoxville. Clarence Brown Theater. Well, they've got their own theater. They don't need to define space. They've got it. But a lot of other troops do.
Right, like Tennessee Stage Company, Marble City Opera.
Yeah. They don't necessarily have their own space that they own. They kind of scramble for spaces, and so this gives them another option. And it's going to be kind of interesting. It's like I said, it's going to be in the basement of the Emporium. You will have access to it. There will be an outdoor entrance from I guess it's Jackson.
Yeah, basically under the Jackson Avenue ramp.
Under the Jackson Avenue ramp from the old city to Gay Street is the entranceway there. Basically this is a corner portion of the underground Knoxville, there on the 100 block of Gay Street, where they elevated Gay Street to get to the viaduct 100 years ago. Longer than 100 years ago
and
now.
Those buildings still have these what were street level spaces that are now 20 feet underground.
Right, but and this is kind of on the corner, and so but they have they're still raising money. They have just about enough money. They're getting ready to start breaking ground on it. It's going to be an interesting space, just because it's in a basement essentially. Although there is an outside entrance to it, so on one side it's on ground level, but from the inside it's down. They're also going to be putting something that the building has needed, and that's an elevator that they're going to put in the lobby, and the way, if you've never been in the Emporium, you walk in the Emporium on the street level, and there are some offices around there, but the basic public areas, you go upstairs one level to and it's all open, but it's one level to gallery spaces, and then you go down one level for gallery spaces. But now with the elevator that they're going to build into this, you'll be able to take it, up and down from the top of the exhibit space. Now, the further up the floor, the building has residences in it, but the gallery spaces, you can take the elevator from there all the way down to the furnace at the bottom of the.
Address some of the accessibility issues that building has had. Yeah.
Yes, like many older buildings around, there can be not very accessible for people with disabilities, and so this addresses that. It's kind of always exciting when something, there's a new space that opens up, and you see, what offerings there will be there. It'll be kind of a state of the art, although small, a state of the art theater space.
Yeah, and available to some of our local arts groups who don't have the resource, who are doing well just to kind of keep themselves going to put on a show, but don't necessarily have easy access. I mean, a lot of those groups that we're talking about, they currently, when they do shows, and they find places around town. Tennessee Stage Company's been, they've had shows in various places. Most recently, they've been doing some of their summer performances over at IAMS. Marble City Opera has kind of bounced around lots of site-specific places, but to have a home for sort of local, small-scale arts organizations, you can definitely see how that it will help those groups, and maybe it will also, encourage other people to think, oh, well, there's a space. Maybe I could do something there too. I mean, when you have the space, it creates opportunity, obviously.
Right, and one of the things that Lisa has talked about is the you can have kind of more contemporary installation type art shows there. With projections on walls and video and all kinds of more high tech, cutting edge presentations instead of just, because the rest of the Emporium, basically all you can do is hang something on a wall,
It's traditional gallery space.
or set something up on a pedestal.
Yep.
And traditional gallery space. But this will enable much more. Other than UT, I don't think there's another place where you can actually do something like that. Well, I guess KMA you could.
Like a video installation.
Right? But this will be, you can do even more than a video installation. It can be truly a 360-degree projection thing. There's one show, Starry Night show that...
the Van Gogh show that's toured around the country.
Yeah.
Kind of introduced people to the idea of being able to walk into an art exhibit.
Yeah.
Surrounded by
something along those lines is certainly possible in this space.
Right. Well, cool. And I just have to say that I remember being in that basement with David Dewhurst, probably Jack Neely, I'm going to guess, sometime in the late 90s, whenever Dewhurst was getting ready to buy the building, or maybe had just bought it, and he gave us a tour. At the time, it was it was being used as storage by its previous owner, Christopher Kendrick. And so it was just the whole and if anybody remembers Kendrick and his aesthetic, there were a lot of old,
there's a lot of stuff,
fake Roman statues and things like that, lying around. But I remember being in that basement in particular, and Dewhurst kind of looking around it and saying, "Look how big this space is! You could do a lot of things here." And of course, the Arts and Culture Alliance has been using that space as rehearsal space for local groups, and also some, I think, studio space for local artists, but this is going to put it to a much more dynamic and public facing use, basically. All right. Well, that's all the books and buildings we have to talk about this week, and not a whole lot on the calendar for the coming week because, of course, we are rapidly approaching the Christmas to New Year's stretch where everything more or less shuts down. But County Commission is meeting on Monday.
County Commission, their last meeting of the year, the last major meeting before the or at least of 2024. They're going to be, one of the big things they're going to be talking about is this proposed new policy on residential infrastructure. A state law was passed earlier this year that enables local governments to set up these infrastructure development districts where new residential development is going in, and they can basically put a special tax assessment on individual properties within this district. The idea is to get the property owners in these newly developed areas, the property owners themselves, to pay for infrastructure improvements like road improvements and more, if need be, that they benefit from. It is one of the things that this meeting that I'm kind of thinking is, it's the property tax increase avoidance meeting, because this is a way to get infrastructure, get funding for the infrastructure without raising property taxes, without relying on standard property taxes. It's not
actually a tax; it's a fee that's going to be charged to homeowners by the developer, by the people who they buy. Like when you buy into, and there's been talk about the possibility of impact fees around the state, where a county could basically just charge a developer X% fee on any new development that would go toward infrastructure. And that has been fiercely opposed by home builders and developers. But this is basically a voluntary program. Like the developer has to come to the county and say, I want to do this for this development that I'm doing. And so it's not technically a tax, even though for the people paying it, it'll feel like it's part of their property taxes, essentially.
Absolutely. One of the things is a lot of times these larger developers will end up paying for road improvements. Anyway, Belltown, which is the big development off Emory Road, in fact, also on at Monday's meeting there's going to be discussion on their payment for improving Emory Road through the stretch where Belltown is going in. But it's a voluntary thing. Basically, it's set up so that the developer can borrow money to do this, and the assessment, which lasts the length of the time of the note used to make these infrastructure
20 or 30 years, whatever.
Yeah, 20 years, whatever. And but the assessment goes toward paying that debt.
And when people buy into that development, they will know, I assume, it'll be spelled out in their purchase agreement and everything that you will be charged for this.
Yeah, and so now one thing is the state law actually allows counties to institute this against relatively small developments. 5 acres or $50 million investment would be the kind of minimum. In Knox County, they have the proposed policy that Mayor Glenn Jacobs' office has set forth would target a little bit larger developments. They would have to be at least 10 acres in size and $100 million investment into it. So it'd be the larger subdivision developments. At least half of the property within this area will have to be residential. It can't be, it can have some commercial in it, so it can be some mixed use, but more than half of it has to be residential. And one thing that people need to get is if you're in an existing subdivision and that 30-acre farm across the road from you is going to be developed, and they put in one of these, you don't have to pay the assessment.
Right.
It's the new property owners don't.
Right. Which is something that you hear a lot from existing residents when a new development comes in, is that they don't think it's fair, and then say the county has to do infrastructure improvements for it. They don't think it's fair for existing residents to have to pay for something that only benefits, the new arrivals. And so this is a way of addressing that to some degree by saying, yes, we are going to make the people who only the new residents are going to be the ones to pay for these improvements. Right.
Now, one of the misconceptions here, I think, is that the people paying for this will be people moving to Knox County from other places, because so many people are moving to Knox County from other places. Well, you got to remember that a lot of the new houses that get built in Knox County are places where people who already live in Knox County move into. For whatever reason, the house that they live in now is old. It's too small. They want a different floor plan, whatever, and they're buying new houses. And this extra $1,000, it's capped at $1,000. The assessment is, so it's to be up to $1,000. So a few hundred extra dollars every year is kind of a disincentive to do that. Yeah. And when you've got we've had our housing crisis, and there's been a lot of talk about supply and demand, and you've got to build at the higher end. If you build at the higher end, then people will, as they move up, they will move into those houses and free up lower priced houses for other people to move into. People who live in apartments maybe can move into a house that is older but costs less. Well, there's a little disincentive there for that chain to get moving. So I'm not sure how big of an impact that might have. It might not matter. But again, the whole point there is to find an alternative source to raising property taxes for everyone.
Right.
And that is part of the motivation for another item that is going to be on the agenda. This one was put forward by Commissioner Larson J., who's running for county mayor in 2026. All of the council or commissioners have signed on as co-sponsors. So this may be the only time anybody in public even speaks of this thing, because they may just go ahead and pass it through without. Probably will be on the consent agenda. They won't even have to discuss it. But it's a proposal. They're going to ask the legislature, the Knox County legislative delegation, and the legislature at large to share tax revenues. And there is a real estate transfer tax in Tennessee that only those who really pay attention during closing really get. It's a tax of 37 cents per $100 of value on the property that is being transferred. It is, and that's all transfers, no matter what. This tax gets placed on there, no matter what kind of deed. None of that stuff matters. If you transfer real estate, the buyer owes 37 cents per $100 of value. All that money gets, of course, gets collected in Knox County or in individual counties, each of the 95 in Tennessee. They pass that along to the state, all of it, period. And this proposal, Jay's proposal, is to for the state to share half of those revenues with the county.
Since the county is the one that's actually going to the trouble of collecting and remitting this.
Right. The county collects the tax, sends it on to the state. Of course, there are a lot of jokes about nowadays. All it takes is a button. Right. You don't need to send a check, but the county does collect the tax. The development, it is whatever, and of course, property transfers not all are, obviously not all new developments. Most are not. But the not only the benefits, but the obligations of providing support and infrastructure to those developments, that burden falls on primarily on the county. So they're going to ask the state, kindly please share. And we'll see what kind of sharing mood the state is in when the legislature convenes in January. Jay and Commissioner Courtney Durrett, Durrett is on the board of the state's county commission association, commissioners association. There's an association for everybody, yep. But she's on the board there. They're going to be following this legislation. It'll probably have to be something that they lobby the governor's office for, and would have to be part of the governor's budget in order to do, because it does, and it's not it doesn't raise nearly the funds that property tax does, but it would help. Increase the revenues for the county. Now, one thing that is not mentioned there. Now, the counties are doing this. The County Commissioners Association in Tennessee, they're getting county commissions all over the state to pass these kinds of resolutions. Blount County's already passed it. Other counties adjacent and around Knox County are looking at it, or either passed it already or going to be voting on one soon. There's been no mention of cities getting their share. Probably once cities kind of get wind of this, they might say, "Hey, if it's property that's inside the city limits of within a county, then that city should get half of what the county gets," or something like that. So counties might end up having to share with the cities as well as the state. But regardless, this is something that is going to be in the legislature. I'm not, the Jay basically says, hey, the legislature, they're running lots of budget surpluses. The state talks about all the surplus, the size of the surplus, everything. They don't need this money. They can share. And but we'll see what kind of sharing mood that the legislature is in. So.
Yeah, and this is the latest of several attempts that county officials have made to try to get the state to share some of their money. Former County Commissioner John Schoonmaker for years and years was pushing on an effort because when the state collects sales taxes and they send local governments back the local portion of them, they keep a percentage of that. I forget, I think it's like 1.125% or something. Yeah. And probably kind of like that's an old fee, and it goes back to the days when it did cost the state a fair amount of money and effort and just like, people power to collect all that and send it all out, because everything was mailed and it was checks going to bank accounts and so on and so forth, and similar to what you're saying with this money, all of it's just done with the push of a button now. And so Schoonmaker for years made the case that the state does not, that is our local sales taxes being collected there. You don't need to keep all of that money because it's not actually costing you very much, if anything, to send it back to us. He didn't get anywhere with that. And, we have this very anti-tax Republican supermajority in the state legislature that has been looking to cut taxes where they can. But when it comes to these kinds of funds, where it's not like they don't get to claim credit for cutting a tax, it would just be sharing that money. Suddenly they get very protective and say, well, we kind of count on that money in the state budget, because if they take even $1 million out of the state budget, then, that's $1 million that's got to come from somewhere else or be cut in spending or so forth. So, yeah, I guess, like you say, we'll see what kind of mood they're in. Prior efforts to get the state to share various kinds of fees in the last 20 years have not been successful.
No, and there's a reason I think that the legislature meets after Christmas, because they're not in a, it's not a giving proposition, for them. So, but anyway, that will also be on the agenda Monday. I'm assuming that it will pass since everybody is signed on. But its fate in Nashville will hinge on the benevolence of the legislature.
Oh dear.
Yeah, well.
All right. Well, I think that wraps us up for this week. We will be back next week to talk about that and anything else that happens in the interim. Meanwhile, I think I still got some Christmas shopping to do. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber for his production work here at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we'll talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.